The 60s were a goldmine of hidden gems, bands that pushed boundaries, redefined genres, and created music that was too wild, too weird, or just too ahead of its time. Some, like the Glass Family and Bubble Puppy, remain lost treasures waiting to be rediscovered. But one thing is clear, these bands didn't just exist in the shadows, they built the foundations for the future of rock, punk, and psychedelic music. Join us in this video as we take a look at 10 obscure bands from the 60s only experts know. Number 1. The Monks. In the mid-60s, 5 American ex-GIs stationed in Germany did something no one saw coming. They shaved their heads into monk-like tonsures, dressed in black robes, and started making music that sounded like a riot breaking out in a steel factory. Their 1966 album Black Monk Time was a chaotic blend of fuzzed-out guitars, pounding drums, manic organ, and anti-establishment chants. While the Beatles were spreading love, the Monks were barking out lyrics like "You're gonna die," over-clanking hypnotic rhythms. They rejected harmonies. They turned melodies into blunt weapons. Their music was aggressive, primitive, and decades ahead of its time. So much so that almost no one knew what to make of it. They were proto-punk before punk even existed, influencing bands like The Fall and the Dead Kennedys. Yet their career flamed out before they ever got the recognition they deserved. 1 year after Black Monk Time, it was over. The world wasn't ready. But listen to tracks like Complication or I Hate You, and it's clear. The Monks weren't a relic of the 60s. They were a transmission from the future. But not every band in the underground 60s scene was looking to burn the house down. Some were building something delicate, ornate, even beautiful. Number 2. The Left Banke. Just walk away, Renee. You won't see me follow. In an era of LSD-drenched jams, the Left Banke went in the opposite direction. Their music sounded like it came from an old candlelit chamber. String arrangements, harpsichords, and haunting, melancholic melodies. They called it Baroque pop, and no one did it better. Their 1967 hit Walk Away Renee is pure art in music form. The soaring violin, the delicate piano, the heart-wrenching vocals. It's a breakup song so beautiful and orchestral, it feels like it belongs in a lost 18th century opera. But despite their genius, the Left Banke was doomed from the start. Internal feuds, bad management, and a revolving door of band members killed their momentum overnight. By the time they tried to release a second album, the moment had passed. Number 3. The Electric Prunes. I had too much to drink last night. Too much to drink. The Electric Prunes' 1967 hit, I Had Too Much to Dream Last Night, sounds exactly like its title suggests. Fuzzy, surreal, like waking up from a dream that you're not sure was real or a hallucination. The opening was an impressive reversed guitar riff that feels like slipping into another dimension, before the song explodes into reverb-drenched vocals and pounding drums. But the Electric Prunes weren't just about trippy vibes. They were pioneers of sonic experimentation. They used distorted tape effects, eerie organs, and unconventional production techniques that would later influence bands like the Flaming Lips and Tame Impala. The downside? They had zero control over their career. Their producer essentially treated them like puppets, forcing them into bizarre projects like a full-blown psychedelic religious album, Mass in F minor, which, no surprise, completely tanked. By the end of the decade, their lineup had been replaced, and the Electric Prunes, as the world knew them, were gone. And speaking of bands who got a raw deal, let's talk about a group that should have been huge, if only their record label hadn't completely screwed them over. Number 4. Bubble Puppy. While the West Coast was dominating the psychedelic scene, a little-known band called Bubble Puppy was brewing something heavier, something that hinted at the future of hard rock. Their breakout hit Hot Smoke and Sassafras opens with a blazing twin guitar attack, something that wouldn't become a rock staple until the 70s. The riffs are thick, the solos are wild, and the whole song is an energy that feels way ahead of its time, somewhere between Cream, early Deep Purple, and the seeds of heavy metal. They had the talent, they had the sound, but they didn't have the right label. Bubble Puppy should have been icons of heavy psych, Instead, they became yet another band swallowed by bad industry decisions. But for those who dig deep enough, Hot Smoke and Sassafras remains a lost gem of late 60s rock. A glimpse at what could have been if the stars and the contracts had aligned. Number 5, The Golden Dawn. Texas in the late 60s was a breeding ground for mind-expanding music, and few bands embodied that more than the 13th Floor Elevators. But lurking in their shadow was another band, one that had the talent, the vision, and the sound to match them. That band was the Golden Dawn. Their 1968 album Power Plant should have been a classic. The swirling reverb, the hypnotic rhythms, and the Rocky Erickson-esque vocals, everything was there. Songs like Starvation and My Time pulse with raw energy, their lyrics dripping with psychedelic paranoia and cryptic mysticism. But instead of being recognized for their own brilliance, the Golden Dawn got written off as a knockoff. The Golden Dawn never recovered from the backlash. The frontman George Kinney walked away from the industry altogether. But decades later, collectors and psych rock fanatics finally gave them their due. What was once dismissed as an imitation is now recognized as an essential piece of Texas psychedelic history. Number 6, the West Coast pop art experimental band. With a name like the West Coast pop art experimental band, you'd expect something weird, and you'd be right. This LA collective wasn't just psychedelic, they were deliberately unsettling. Formed by a mix of musicians and a wealthy, eccentric businessman named Bob Markley, the band blended folk harmonies with eerie experimental noise and biting social commentary. Their 1966 album Volume 1 sounds like a dream that slowly dissolves into a nightmare. Shifting Sands lulls you in with its ethereal beauty, only for tracks like Help, I'm a Rock, a surreal Frank Zappa cover, to pull you into total madness on Volume 2. On Volume 3, they're supposed they give a war, and no one comes. A song that sounds like it belongs on a 60s protest album, until you realize it's drenched in irony and creepy paranoia. The band had no commercial prospects. They were too weird and erratic. By the early 70s, they faded into obscurity, leaving behind a handful of cult classic records that sound even stranger today than they did back then. Number 7, Os Mutantes. In the 1960s, Brazil was under a brutal military dictatorship. Free expression was dangerous. But that didn't stop Os Mutantes from making some of the wildest, most revolutionary music of the decade. They weren't just a rock band, they were a psychedelic movement, blending Beatles-esque melodies with traditional Brazilian rhythms, fuzzy guitars, and bizarre surrealist lyrics. Os Mutantes created a sound that felt alien yet familiar. Their self-titled 1968 debut sounds like a fever dream. A Minha Menina mixes Tropicalia grooves with distorted guitar licks straight out of a garage rock anthem. That Macumba sounds like a tribal chant from another dimension. Every track is a playground of sonic experimentation. But as their fame grew, so did the government's interest in them. The dictatorship cracked down on the Tropicalia movement, forcing many artists into exile. By the early 70s, Os Mutantes fractured. Frontwoman Rita Lee left, and the band drifted into obscurity. It wasn't until the 90s that their influence was fully recognized. Kurt Cobain called them geniuses. Beck cited them as a huge inspiration. And today, Os Mutantes are legends, not just in Brazil, but in the entire history of psychedelic rock. They were ahead of their time, just like this next band, a group that used humor, absurdity, and sheer musical chaos to create something entirely their own. Number 8, the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band. I'm the urban spaceman, baby, I can fly. If Monty Python formed a rock band, it would sound something like the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band. They were part rock, part jazz, part vaudeville, and entirely unhinged. Their music wasn't just strange, it was deliberately ridiculous, poking fun at the very idea of pop stardom, while secretly being incredible musicians. Take I'm the Urban Spaceman, their 1968 hit produced by none other than Paul McCartney, under the pseudonym Apollo C. Vermouth. It's a whimsical, upbeat tune with catchy melodies. until you realize it's a satire of every feel-good pop song ever written. Or Death Cab for Cutie, a lounge pastiche so over the top that it later inspired the name of an actual indie band. Frontman Neil Innes, who later worked with Monty Python, had a knack for songs that sounded like parodies but were secretly brilliant compositions. The band hopped between styles. One moment they'd be performing a twisted cabaret number. The next they'd dive into psychedelic rock absurdity. But as the 70s rolled in, they faded out. Rock was becoming serious business, and the industry didn't have room for their brand of musical anarchy. Their influence lived on, not just in comedy rock acts like Weird Al and Tenacious D, but in every band that refuses to take itself too seriously. And while the Bonzos were goofing around, another band was quietly making some of the most underrated psychedelic pop of the decade, only to be almost entirely forgotten. Number 9. The Glass Family. The Glass Family should have been huge. They had the talent, they had the sound, they had even toured with The Doors and Love. But somehow, they still ended up as one of the most overlooked bands of the 60s. Their 1968 album Electric Band is a lost psychedelic gem. Tracks like House of Glass feature swirling, dreamy instrumentation, while Born in the USA, no, not that one, grooves with infectious bass lines and a unique folky vibe. Agorn, Elements of Complex Variable, delivers pure trippy bliss, with intricate arrangements and a sense of surreal, mind-bending experimentation. They blended psychedelic rock with folk, surf, and even jazz influences, creating an album that encapsulates the laid-back, yet complex West Coast sound of the late 60s. So what went wrong? Terrible timing. The psychedelic wave was already peaking, and their label barely promoted them. By the time their album hit shelves, the market was flooded with similar acts. They vanished into obscurity, becoming just another band that got lost in the shuffle. For those who dig deep enough, the Glass Family is a hidden treasure, a time capsule of late 60s California psychedelia, untouched by mainstream fame, but just as magical as anything the Byrds or the Doors were putting out. But if we're talking about bands that deserved more recognition, we have to end with one of the most influential, overlooked, and downright ferocious rock bands of the 60s. Number 10. The Sonics. Before punk, before grunge, before garage rock was even a thing, there was the Sonics. Formed in Tacoma, Washington, the Sonics sounded like a band trying to destroy their instruments every time they played. Their music was loud, fast, and utterly unhinged, with drums pounding like they owed the drummer money. Their 1965 debut, Here Are the Sonics, is one of the rawest, most intense records of the decade. Psycho, Strike 9 and The Witch sound dangerous, as if rock and roll itself is about to burst into flames. They were proto-punk before punk existed, influencing everyone from Iggy Pop to the Cramps to Nirvana. Their lo-fi, no-holds-barred approach became the blueprint for garage rock, punk, and grunge decades later, but in the 60s, they were just too much, too soon. While other bands were getting slicker, the Sonics stayed raw and untamed, never breaking into the mainstream. By the late 60s, they fizzled out, years ahead of their time. It wasn't until the garage rock revival of the late 70s and the grunge explosion of the 90s that their influence was finally recognized. By then, it was clear the Sonics weren't just another forgotten band. They were one of the most important underground rock bands of all time. Which of these bands blew your mind? Did we miss an underground legend that deserves a shout out? Drop your favorite in the comments down below. Let's keep the conversation going. If you love discovering hidden gems and music history that goes beyond the mainstream, hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and remember, the best music isn't always on the charts. Sometimes it's buried in the underground, just waiting to be found.